If you manage aging, there can be some real rewards in it. If it manages you, you're in trouble. Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last for which the first was made. I believe that. Whenever you start making shorter plans, you're subconsciously telling yourself to die. So I'm all in favor of getting older, but I never want to get old. Life either challenges you or threatens you. Ultimate freedom is our responsibility to choose our attitude. I wrote 3 little words on the inside of my skull, and if you ever performed a craniotomy, you'd see them etched on the inside of my skull. Wait to worry. You're catching me when I'm in that marvelous period of life when I oscillate in and out of senility. And you can't ever tell which one I'm in, you know, and I really don't know myself.
Fred, we've been talking about doing this for a long time, haven't we?
Oh, we have.
Finally got around to it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful time of life, though. You're catching me when I'm in that marvelous period of life when I oscillate in and out of senility. And you can't ever tell which one I'm in, you know, and I really don't know myself. But it's great to be here with you.
Well, Fred, I won't be so impolite as to ask how old you are, but you were here when World War I began, I understand.
At least when it ended.
Okay.
Yeah.
Growing old gracefully, or finding growing old not to be such a burden, but something to look forward to. And just as long as you want, would you give us some guidelines and wisdom on what it means to grow old and how you look at it?
I got interested in the subject because of my friend Maxie. One day after he retired, 65, he said, "I'm an old man." And I resented it because he was my role model. I said, "Maxie, older but never old." In fact, when I think about it, I'm in favor of getting older.
It's not all that bad, huh?
Well, the alternative is getting buried.
Yeah.
So I'm all in favor of getting older, but I never want to get old. You see people who at 40 years old, they're old. Right. You see people 90 years old and they're not old.
They're young. Mm-hmm.
They just have experience. And so I became interested. I wrote an article in Leadership magazine on older but never old. It reminded me of what Mike Todd said. You remember the movie producer who married Elizabeth Taylor. Yeah. They asked him, said, were you ever poor? Oh, he said no. Broke, yes, yeah. But never poor. Okay. Because poor was an attitude of mind. Broke was just was financial. And that's the way I felt about getting older. And I started reading books on it. And I became so interested because the people who are writing books are 50 years old.
50?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's 4 ways to face it. You can defy it, which you see in so many athletic programs and all this kind of stuff for middle age, and you know, and cosmetics and all this kind of stuff. And you just see people just defying getting old, and they're getting old all the time. Then you can deny it, and you see some lady 60 years old who's trying to dress like she's 18, you know, and it's ridiculous. But they try to deny it. You find men, particularly, they have to be given an excuse to get old. You know, you go down to the club and somebody say to you, had a heart attack lately? I said, no, I haven't even had ulcers. Yeah. And you really feel like you're not giving your all. I mean, you're holding something back. You're not sacrificing yourself. But denying it, defying it, then others are passive and they just endure it.
Okay.
They're the ones that my doctor at Mayo said, Fred, for most people, getting old is hell. Well, it is if you're just going to endure it. And then there's managing it.
Okay. Deny it, defy it, endure it, and manage it. Okay.
Now, I choose to manage it. And I want to write a book because I'm 83, and one of these days I'll be older. And I want to be prepared for it when the time comes. And so I've been thinking about kind of how I would do it. I think you better start when you're about 50. My friend John McStay had a lunch for me at the City Club the other day. 5 of the outstanding CEOs of Dallas, all in their early 50s. And we sat down, and I didn't know what it was all about. And we sat down, and they said, Fred, tell us what we ought to be doing before we get there. Now, some of them are not quite that courteous. A friend of mine called me and asked me to have lunch with him at the club, and I went down. And he said, Fred, I'm 63. I'm at the 3/4 pole. You are just about to go across the finish line.
Very, very nice.
Yeah. Would you tell me about the home straight? Well, we had a nice visit back. But these guys spent 2 hours, and these are busy guys, just quizzing me. How should I prepare for aging? Now, they're good executives, and therefore they are preparing. Most people don't prepare at all. It happens to them, and they're very surprised, and it can be harmful. I think I'd suggest a few things. First, as early as you can in your life, you need to develop mental discipline. By that, I simply mean the control of the mind. See, we need to establish habits and then practice those habits until they become reflex. And then when they become reflex, we don't have to worry about the habits. They're part of us. And mental discipline to me is certainly that. I'd say the number one thing in mental discipline for me is to accept current reality. I'd almost put it in quotes. Because when you get there, you want to be sure you're there. And you see people who want to talk about how it was, how it should be, how it could be, and they join the used to club.
The used to club.
I used to do this, I used to do that, See, they are not defining current reality. I want to know, as objectively as I can, what are my limitations, what are my assets, what are my liabilities, what are my circumstances, what are my options. See, there's certain options disappear. Well, I want to know what it is. And current reality is the big thing to me.
So if you face the options that are going to disappear, then you've got a better chance of making the best use of the options that remain.
Oh, no question.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's like in business. You can't. See, when you are managing, you're talking about being active and not passive. When you're enduring, you're passive. And it's like a ship or like a boat where you have no sail. And so you're just at the mercy of the water being washed around. Well, that doesn't appeal to me when you have the other option. I think my original thinking on this came from Erik Erikson, professor of psychology at Harvard. He said this when he was about 86 or 87 years old. He said, the secret of aging is that you keep the core of your life with integrity, and you move the deterioration to the periphery.
How do you do that?
Well, first you have to analyze it.
Yep.
See, if you try to keep a deteriorating something in the core is not healthy. So you've got to take the healthy parts of your life and put them into your core, and then move to the periphery, the deterioration. For example, I understand at 100, 105, you start to lose sex. and so you move it to the periphery. See, when you retire, you move your career to the periphery. I see people who are still reading all of the trade journals and everything and not doing anything in the world. They're retired. But they got in the habit of doing it.
But that's their link to the used to club, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And what's wrong with that, Fred, in a way? I mean, if that's...
You can't be dynamic used to.
So what you're saying is they really need to cultivate new interests.
Oh, you have to, first you have to become flexible enough to break your old routines.
Okay.
And it's a very practical reason. Because if you don't break your old routines, you have a measuring stick by which you measure your loss. See, now, if I used to be able to jump 3 feet and now I can't jump but 1 foot, and I keep thinking about the 3 feet, I'm thinking about the deterioration. So you have to change to your current reality. You change your reflexes, everything, to your current reality. And then you live in the present and not in the past. Along with mental discipline, certainly you have to learn to accept something. For example, you never can enjoy the good until you accept the bad.
Okay, say that again, Fred.
Until you accept the bad, you can never enjoy the good. Because you're thinking about the bad. See, if you just keep thinking about the deterioration, you can't enjoy what you got left because you're thinking about what you lost. And so part of the reality is simply to accept the reality of what is, our limitations and so forth. And it's the mental discipline has to be started early. You don't wait until you're 70 years old to become mentally disciplined. Another way in mental discipline, you know, a friend of mine who's a spine surgeon, a great one, he said he's made a study of people who heal. He said those who externalize their sickness heal quickly. Those who internalize heal very slowly. For example, he said, I can operate on an executive and he'll get well quickly. And when I listen to people internalize problems, why is this happening to me? You know, why does God let this happen to me? You know, what have I done that I should deserve this? See, that's internalizing a problem. Now, when you turn the problem into a project, like executives do, you say, okay, here's the problem, here's the time span, here's the procedure, here's the results I expect. You're externalizing the problem. So the more you externalize, the better you can manage. And that's a matter of mental discipline. Now, also, I think you come into the matter of memory. So many people equate aging with loss of memory. Now, there's a certain amount of loss, thank heaven, there's a certain amount of there's some people I wish I could forget. There's some occasions, some very embarrassing situations. But I am totally convinced memory has nothing to do with your ability to think. And so when you lose your memory, you don't lose your ability to think. Look, I may forget the name of that as a mug, but I can drink out of it. And what's the purpose? Drinking out of it is the thing. And I have a theory about memory. Your memory is a warehouse, and everything is still there. Your problem is your retrieval system. Now, when you're young, everybody you've got retrieving in there are young too. And you say, I want, and man, this guy runs and gets it, brings it out of the warehouse. And you say, I want this, and man, and then they start anticipating what you want. I mean, they bring it. But you get my age, those old suckers have gotten old too.
And the warehouse is a lot fuller.
Yeah, but this old boy can't hear. And you say to him, you say brains, and he thinks you said trains. I mean, he brings you the wrong thing. Another one's got arthritis. He can't get it today, he'll get it to you tomorrow. And here it is tomorrow, you'll remember what you should have remembered. Well, it's just your retrieval system. Any old boy. It's still there because if you act as my retrieval system, I can remember. You say you remember that? Yeah, if you ask me about it. I couldn't retrieve it, but you can retrieve it from me because it's still in the warehouse. And also, I think your memory is there in mass and not in particular. For example, my relationship with my dear friend Howard Butt is a mass there. Now, I can't remember everything that created that mass. All the wonderful experiences we've had through our life, things will trigger it, and I'll pull it back. But the mass is there. And so the particular may get away from me, but the mass is there. So memory, I think you have to be very careful not to think that a loss of memory is a loss of thinking ability or reasoning ability, or you're losing your mind and that kind of thing. I don't see any research that says that we ought to decrease in our mental functions other than disease. If you have disease, yes. But, you know, we know people who've in their, well, Ruth Peel, as well as the other day, Norman's wife, 92 years old, still going to the office every day, sharp as a tack. You know, that's wonderful. Not everybody can do it, but she's had good health and she's mentally sharp and she stayed. I think the idea of staying with it, and the reason we don't stay with it is I see so many people who plateau in life early, and they plateau because they become comfortable. They make enough money, enough prestige, enough family, and they climb up and they get on this plateau and it's comfortable. And they just start going around in a circle, repeating their experiences because it's comfortable. And they don't use their mind like they ought to use it. They listen to radio or they ask other people's opinion. I read something the other day, Thomas Merton. He said, I don't read for you to tell me what to think. I read for you to tell me how to think.
How to think, huh?
Yeah. And so if you learn how to think instead of what to think, you know, you keep your mind in good shape. In the emotional discipline is more difficult because emotions are feelings. But you have to come to the genuine belief that facts and feelings are not the same.
So, Fred, what you're saying is as you have to discipline yourself mentally, now you're talking about disciplining your emotions?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're separate. One is a mental activity, the other is emotional activity. The emotion, as our Jewish friends would say, is the heart, the feelings. And I personally just can't let my feelings run wild. Wasn't it Teresa of Avila that said, imagination is the tyranny of the house? I find in imaginations you have a negative imagination and you have a positive imagination. And you just cannot let your negative imagination control you. Now, your positive imaginations are very positive. See, it's the difference between life either challenges you or threatens you. Every event. And the more you can be challenged and the less you can be threatened, the more productive you can be. And people with positive imaginations are challenged by life. They're not threatened. Those with negative imaginations, they are threatened, and they stay in that constant fear of being threatened. But in the emotion, one of the most helpful things I've ever read was Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Logotherapy.
Logotherapy. Yeah. You know, a Jew put in the concentration camp. Till everyone died, just a very few of them lived. He lived. And the reason he lived, because he was stealing scraps of paper and writing out on those scraps of paper the theory of logotherapy. You know, the other psychiatrists, some of them say you power, pleasure, sex, Freud with sex. And he said, no, meaning. Man searches for meaning, not these other things. These other things are really just the road to meaning. And if you went out to Los Angeles and you looked at the freeways and the traffic was all locked up, you could mistake it for a parking lot. But it isn't supposed to be a parking lot. It's supposed to be a throughway to something else. Well, he is saying that sex and power and pleasure are just the road to meaning, which I think is so much more intelligent. And he wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning. And in it he gave a definition that's been helpful to me. Ultimate freedom is man's right to choose his attitude. Ultimate freedom is man's right to choose his attitude. He said, I was freer in that camp than my guards. He said, my guards absorbed their attitude from Hitler. I chose mine. I had this brought home in a business situation. I was in New York, and I'd been working with a client. Friday night, I rushed out to get on the plane, hoping I'd get a seat, and all the seats were taken. Frustrating as it could be. I had to go back into Manhattan and spend the night, and then come out and fly on my own time. And, you know, for a consultant, that's terrible, terrible. And so 10 o'clock Saturday morning, I get on the American Airlines flight. And we're sitting there for a few minutes, and then the captain comes on. He said, folks, I'm sorry to tell you, but we've got a 2-hour mechanical delay. Well, here it is, Saturday morning. You're flying on your own time, and you got a 2-hour mechanical delay. Well, this fellow in front of me just couldn't stand it. He's a little tight, wound, hyperactive guy. He jumps up and grabs his stuff out of the rack and takes off for the door, trailing disparaging remarks about the canine ancestry of the airline's officials. And he was heading for the counter, and I thought, man, that makes a lot of sense to me. So I jump up, and I'm going to go with him. And we're going up and jump on this little girl who controls all jet failures, you know, the one at the desk. And suddenly I remembered Frankl's ultimate freedom is man's right to choose his attitude. And I just sat down. I said, okay, what do we got here? Great big comfortable chair to sit in. As before, they packed them like sardines. You got a beautiful girl going to serve me free coffee. I got a briefcase full of work. If I'd have seen the job advertised in the newspaper, I'd applied for it. Yeah. And here I was. I had it, I think, 2 of the finest hours of that year. I spent on that plane because Viktor Frankl said, ultimate freedom is the right to choose. I'd like to put it in a Christian context. Ultimate freedom is our responsibility to choose our attitude.
So, Fred, you're not saying that we recognize the meaning that's there necessarily. You're saying we impose the meaning upon the circumstances, or both.
Yeah, we get the ultimate meaning out of the circumstance. But, you know, there are other emotions that you have to learn to control.
We're still talking about getting old, aren't we?
Oh, we're talking about what we have to do before we get old.
Okay.
We're talking about discipline of emotions. When I went to work with UNESCO, I wasn't qualified for my job. And I was scared to death of losing it because, man, I loved that job. And I knew I wasn't qualified. And so I got to worrying. And I mean, I became a professional worrier. I mean, I wasn't an amateur. I mean, I didn't take my worries and go to bed. I was afraid of going to sleep. And I mean, you couldn't wake up with any self-respect knowing you'd gone to sleep when you should have been worrying. So I got up and sat in a rocking chair, brewed myself a pot of coffee, and sit there and rock and drink this coffee and worry. And I went back to bed. I didn't, lay there and toss. I laid there and perked. And it was getting to me. And I said, I got to do something about this. Well, I started analyzing worry. And I said, most of my worry, in fact, all of it, I do between the time I hear the rumor or I feel the rumor and I see the facts. This is the area in which I worry. If I got facts, I act. But before I get to facts, here I've got this area, and this is where the worry comes in. Well, I wrote 3 little words on the inside of my skull, and if you ever performed a craniotomy, you'd see them etched on the inside of my skull. Wait to worry.
Wait to worry.
Wait to worry. Simply meant wait until you get the facts. And you know, after 2 years of practicing that, I've never worried a day since that time. But every once in a while I have to read it to myself.
How old were you, Fred, when you
I was about 28 years old. And I guess that has been picked up. Father Keller picked it up. Gerald Mann picked it up and wrote it in the book. And Ann Richards, when she was governor, read it and came out and said, you know, the price of the book, if I got that one term, wait to worry, it kind of is identified with me. But it's true. See, if we just wait to worry. Let me give you another way of handling emotion, discipline. That is, turn your experience into an experiment. This is a psychological principle that was brought out in the Westinghouse studies. Years ago, they spent $1 million trying to find out what made people productive. They never could find out. They stored the material, and another psychiatrist came by and read it and said, oh, the experimental syndrome. Anytime you're experimenting with something, you get results. Now, when it quits being an experiment, the results will start to taper off. Now, I use this in business a great deal. For example, a task force is a good illustration. A task force will just work like a son of a gun, but they wouldn't work long term like they'll work short term. Well, what they're doing is the experimental syndrome. I was speaking at the International Women's Club, Banff, Canada, and only man there and 800 tremendously successful women. And my reservation got fouled up. I had trouble proving it to my wife. But my reservation, because it was during the stampede at Calgary, and my reservation and so I had to stay over. So about 3 or 4 of us went out to lunch over at Lake Louise. And one of them was a Hungarian princess. And she had satin up and pearls and looked at you through this lorgnette. And great accent. And one was the Caterpillar distributor from Mexico. A woman, weighed about 100 pounds, you know, and no more than 4 feet, 11 inches probably. Fascinating group of people. And the other women were walking in front, and I was walking with the princess that we all assumed. And I felt somebody hit me in the back, just nearly knocked my breath out. And I looked around, and she had pounded me in the back. And with,
who pounded you?
This woman. Okay. And with the flattest voice you ever heard, she said, "Smith, you're an old slum dweller, ain't you?" I looked at her in total amazement. I said, "Yeah." She said, "I didn't recognize one anywhere. I see one. So am I." She said, "This is all put on." I said, "What do you mean it's all put on?" She said, "Look, I came out of a coffee shop in Ohio." And I said, "Tell me about your interesting experiences." Oh, she said one, and I'll never forget. She said, "I was seating and greeting in the hotel coffee shop, and said the salesman coming in, and said they were making smart remarks, you know. Yeah. What do you care? You're no doctor. You know, and all these smart remarks that salesmen make to seaters. And she said, I got to crying. And said an old Jewish salesman called me over and said, "Honey, what's wrong with you?" Said, "People, they drive me crazy." He said, "Got the answer for you." Said, "You go next door to the drugstore and you get your little Blue Horse notebook and you bring it over here to me." She went over and got this little notebook. He said, "I'll show you how to never let people bother you again." He just took it and divided it in 4 parts. In the first part, he put 3 initials that indicated that the mother ate dog food. And the second was one word that made you think that the parents weren't married. The third was heels, and the fourth was gentlemen. He handed it back to her and said, now, every time you seat somebody, you classify them. One SOB, one illegitimate, one heel, one gentleman. Said, you'll never be bothered again. Just classify them. She said, you know, Fred, I got so interested in this that I got to run in race shows. In 1 week, I was short one SOB, and I just couldn't wait for him to come in. And then she had a quarter. Well, very scientific. What she did, she changed an experience into an experiment. I had a friend that owned the Rose Hill Cemetery in Whittier, California, second biggest cemetery in the world. And he asked me to drop in sometime and just to visit his sales meeting. He had 100 people selling cemetery lots. And, oh, it's a great experience. If you've never been around, there are two kinds of people selling cemetery lots. Cynical, who are in it for the money, and those who are morbidly concerned with death. And they bring people out there, and they charge more for a grave under a tree.
Under a tree. Oh,
you got to have shade on your loved one. He may be in hell, but you got to put shade over him. And the funniest thing. And, of course, they went around knocking on doors. And you can imagine knocking on a door, it comes on and says, I'm with Rose Hill Cemetery. Are you thinking about dying? Yeah. Well, the turnover in the sales force was tremendous.
Wonder why. Huh?
Oh, yeah. So John said, got any ideas? I said, John, all my business life I've been turning experiences into experiments. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a notebook and give each one of these salesmen a card, really, and we're going to have all types of door slammers. Hard door slammer, woman door slammer, man door slammer, kid door
rude
slammer.
Ones, polite ones.
Rude ones. And every time somebody slams the door, you just put it down. We cut the turnover 50%.
Incredible, huh?
Oh, yeah, they got interested because it was no longer an experience.
Are you saying make a game out of life?
No, it's a control of the emotion. The most difficult thing that ever happened to me in my life.
But you are having fun with it. It's more than just an analytical experiment in a lab. You're turning what could be a pain in the neck into a little bit of fun, right?
I'm going to have fun in life. I don't want to, I want to have fun in my life. In fact, I see life in a strange sort of way. I see life as a tape.
A tape?
A tape, like a cassette. And the top is serious and the bottom is humorous.
Okay.
And I flip the tape. I'm talking about the same thing. I can talk about it humorously. I can talk about it seriously. And if I get tired of talking about it seriously, I flip it over and talk about it humorously. Same subject, same intention, same feeling about it. It's just a deviation of the way you handle it. But I was going to tell you about, I was speaking at a big convention in a Hollywood hotel in Florida. Right in the middle of my speech, I had an adrenaline attack. I'd never even heard of them. And Ken, I began to shrink. And I got about this tall, and I was hanging on to the speaker stand with my fingers, just like a monkey. And here I was standing up there speaking professionally, never had any stage fright. And here I was just quivering. And I couldn't get my breath. My mouth was dry. I couldn't complete a whole sentence. And I couldn't imagine what in the world happened to me. For 2 years, I couldn't even talk on the phone about speaking.
That just happened once.
It happened that time, but it continued for 2 years.
Oh, every time you spoke?
Oh, friend. Now, the way I got over it was I turned it into an experiment. I started keeping account of which stories I could tell and where it happened, how long my sentences could be, what were the conditions, and eventually I got easy about it. I've never gone through anything like that in my life. But it was just terrible. It was excruciating. In fact, you've never been through have you ever been through an adrenaline storm?
No.
I went to Mayo, and I said to him, I had this storm. And the doctor said, don't you take many of those. You'll die. But I was a speaker.
You actually felt like you were shrinking.
Oh, I shrunk to about this big and hanging on with my one finger like a monkey. It was the darndest experience I ever had in my life.
And that's called an adrenaline storm?
Well, this is what happened.
Okay.
Adrenaline storm. And I tell you, every once in a while, now this is 20 years ago, every once in a while I can feel the possibility. And it's a frightening thing. I mean, I had to go ahead and speak because but I had to change. I had to go to short sentences. I had to go to short jokes. I couldn't do anything because my breath ran out. And boy, my heart just beat like this. Oh, it's rough stuff. But by turning it into an experiment, and of course through prayer and through work, I got over it. And but the control of the emotion, the discipline of the emotion, is extremely important. So you have the discipline of the mind. You have, and now what we're talking about is managing and discipline of the emotion, then establishing the core. As Eric said, the core must have integrity. So for me, I've got to define what is the core. Now, I find 4 parts of my core that must have integrity. Number 1 is health. Everything is predicated on your health when you get older. Without health, you're at the mercy of your health. But in health, Ken, I've given up high jumping.
You have?
Yeah. I find that I don't need to do that anymore. I don't need to be healthy enough to do that. In health, I need 2 things. I need energy and I need mobility. These are the 2 things that I must protect as I get older. Now, energy, man, it just hurts me to see kids wasting energy, just running up and down trying to get rid of it. I say, man, put it in a bucket and I'll buy it. I'd love to have it, just any amount of it. You find with energy, as you get older and it decreases, you have to treat it as an investment. And you have to invest it where you know it pays a dividend. You can't waste energy. But also you find that energy renews itself under certain circumstances and decreases itself under other circumstances. For example, I can no more lose my temper because it uses too much energy.
So it's not worth it, huh?
No, it just isn't worth it. When I was young, man, you could lose it, and so what? You had another bucket of it left, and I mean, it wasn't any problem. Now, the well would be dry. But you find that you want to stay with the things that create energy. One of the great things that create energy, two things that create energy with me. One is the feeling of accomplishment. At the end of the day, if I feel beat, I know I didn't do much. If I feel good at the end of the day, I know I did something.
Just a parenthesis, you still go to the office, don't you?
Yeah, when I can. I have to be at home quite a bit with Mary Alice, who is sick. But, I keep an office to keep a secretary. I keep a secretary for my wife's mental health. And the office, I think, is also for that reason. But I do still keep it. But when I'm low with energy, if I can accomplish something, I used to realize that I could get a little extra out of the day if I kept something back to work on at night that I love to work on. And I would get to it, and when I'd get to working, my energy would come because I'd keep it back, and that's part of the control. And the other thing is, if I can just talk to some of my friends, I can call Jack and get into a 30-minute conversation, particularly if he called me, really, because it's better when talking his nickel than it is on mine. But, you know, I've got these wonderful friends that I can just talk to. And it's just like a filling station. It's like when you're driving and you say, I'm going to get gas, you know, at Texarkana, I'm going to get some gas at Little Rock. I've got these friends that I know I can get some gas from. And so I can call them and talk to them, and it is energizing. Now, so energy, you treat it as an investment. I think the second thing in the core for me is wealth. I say it because it rhymes with health. What I mean is independent wealth, to where you have control of your life. By being independent, and you don't get that at 70. You start that way back earlier. In fact, if you want to later on, we'll talk about money and my relation to it and the way I feel about it. But wealth, because you'll find that people want you around a lot more if you can pay your own way. And even your kids, if you're going to see them and you're carrying them a present, it's a little better than saying we're going to stay 3 months with you. and so I never disparage money. Money is extremely important, and it's part of the core. And independent wealth is part of the core. Then the third part of the core, that is relation. And you don't build your relations by leaving Michigan and going down to Florida to a retirement village. That's not the kind of relation you need to support you in your old age. The most important is your relation with yourself. If you don't have your own self-respect, forget it. You'll never have good relations. You've got to be able to respect yourself.
Do you enjoy your own company?
Oh, my, yes. Yeah, an inordinate amount. In fact, you know, the two things I have to have accomplishment and I have to have solitude. I love solitude. If you ask me my picture of myself, it was a poor kid, 10 years old, sitting up on a platform looking out a window in an attic where I just sit for hours and think. And I'm still that kid.
But Fred, what's interesting is you speak of solitude, but you also thrive on your relationships. They energize you.
Oh, yes.
So it's the balance.
Oh yes. And they both are real. But the solitude, see, without solitude, I can't balance my life. I can't keep all the parts together. But in solitude, I can keep them together. And so, you know, Henry Nouwen wrote this very interesting book in which he said in aging, we make 3 transitions. And we move from loneliness to solitude. There's so many people who are lonely. They need other people around them all the time. I really feel sorry for them because they don't know the joy of solitude. A doctor once said to me, a lot of older people, when they die, we put natural causes, we should put loneliness because they die of loneliness. But we move from...
Well, it's almost like dying of a broken heart,
yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
We move from loneliness to solitude, and this gives us control. Again, we are talking about managing. And so you have solitude, which is so important. In relation with yourself. Then the next is, of course, your relation with your family. My wife is the glue that holds our family together. She is one of the great mothers that I've ever seen. I was a lousy father.
You think so?
Oh, I know so. One of the top psychiatrists in the world today was a friend of mine as a young man, and we used to travel together. And he'd come over to my house, our house. And he said to me one day, "You're a lousy father of small children." He said, "But you'll have a very close family, and you'll have a very mature family." And he's been right about that. our daughter, Mary Helen, youngest daughter, she introduced me at an educators meeting. And she said, my dad never understood children. He always thought they were miniature adults. and I did. I just had no rapport.
Were you a good grandfather?
No. I'm not a good parent. I'm a good friend. I'm a good mentor. But I was never really what I would call a good parent. I look at our children, they're much better parents.
Well, Fred, just out of curiosity, suppose you invited your grown children to come be here today and just sit in on this. Would they do it?
In order to protect the family.
Okay.
We have a very, very close family. It's delightful. But I take no credit for it. But in the family relations, I'll have to tell you this. Fred married after he'd done his service in school, and he was a little late marrying, and so he called me. He said, Dad, it's customary that your best friend be your best man, and I consider you my best friend, and would you be my best man? Well, you know, I was so flattered, but obligated. And you know, executives don't like to be obligated. We want everybody else to need us, but we don't want to need anybody else. That's kind of the way we live. And so I said to him, son, when you have the time, you know, we have a very close, loving family. I'll sit down and tell you what I know. He said, Dad, we do have a close, loving family, but it was in spite of you instead of because of you. I said, let's go back through this one more time. See, I thought maybe he'd forgotten that I hadn't written my will yet. He repeated it. He said, Dad, we love you. You did the best you could. You just didn't understand. He said, you were president at the company. You were president at home. You ran the home just like you ran the business. You thought production came before relation. And said, Dad, in a home, relation is the production. And I said, first time in my life I understand it. So I got the family together and I told them what he had said, and I wanted to make a change. But I've never gone through anything as difficult as that. Trying to put relation first. I cannot do it naturally, normally. It just isn't. I work at it, but and they are very forgiving of my inability at times. But I do see the relation in a church as well as a home. Relation is the production. And when I saw that, but I used to treat them, Mary Alice was the vice president in charge of operations. Brenda was the works manager. You carry your grievances up through the rank and you bring them back down. I think
corporation at home. Yeah.
I think one of the worst things I ever did, and the kids told me later, I said, Dad, you were always trying to decide things on what was right, and you were always crossing up Mother. Said, you should have backed her up right or wrong. Well, you don't do that in the business. You do what's right. But what was right there was to back up Mary Alice. The relation with family is very good, but the relation also with friends. I'm always asking people, who is the oldest friend you got? Meaning, how long have you known them? Because I found people who don't have long-term friends use people.
Interesting.
And they use them and
use them up and go on to the next
one.
Oh,
yeah.
Huh?
What can they do for me? But people with long relationships, there's something solid about those. We were the other day, friends, we've been 55 years. Another couple in Greensboro, 50 years. A long time. But you realize that you're going to have a few friends. Now, you have a lot of acquaintances. And I think as we age, we learn to drop the acquaintances. Because you had mutual interest in the business or something. You weren't personally related. You were activity related. I think the saddest person I know was the vice president of purchasing, who, when he lost his job, thought people liked him. I mean, you know, the salesmen all sit around and laugh at him and, you know, everything they can, take him to the ball games. Well, when he lost his job, I mean, he's dead. He thought they liked him. No, our acquaintances, we're friends by association, by activity. And we won't keep those, and we don't regret it, and we don't spend a lot of time trying to keep them. But the long-term friends, and you have to keep contact with them.
Fred, let me interrupt one more. Have you ever had the experience of losing a long-term friendship?
Yes, 3. Very painful.
How'd you handle it?
I tried to handle it with objectivity. I tried to understand the reason. I asked myself, is it my fault? Could I have done anything differently? In each one of the cases, I couldn't have done anything differently. Circumstances put us juxtapositioned, and his interest and mine simply became different. And when I say lose them, I lost the intimacy and the contact. But one of them, dear guy, his son said to me not long ago, said, Fred, my dad still says you're the best friend he ever had. Never seen him.
That must have meant a lot, huh?
Oh, because our interests have separated. But I think it's important that you not do anything harmful. For example, telling confidences, or making disparaging remarks, or try to make yourself feel good by making him look bad. Respect the friendship. Even if it's dead, you may have to bury it, but respect it. And then because it was a valuable thing. And sometimes it lives its life, and it dies. And when it does, you accept it, but without bitterness. I'm going to tell you my theory of friendships. I've often wondered, why do 2 people become friends? If I had a blackboard, I'd show you. Let's say you have 2 circles, and the circles represent 2 men. I'll talk men first. And they bump together, and they like each other. And so they hunt a little, and they fish together, they play golf together. They just kind of like each other. May even get their wives together. And then comes the intimacy process. Because the 2 men liking each other isn't enough. Inside of each one of us, there's a little boy. And those little boys have to like each other. And it's so much fun to watch acquaintances take the fence down and let the boys meet. And if the little boys don't like each other, you build the fence back up. But if they like each other, that'll be intimate for the rest of your life. In just most cases. And I think it's because that the little boys are right and wrong. They're black and white. They understand life as it actually is. And we've become so sophisticated in our...
and they love to play still, right?
Yeah. And they're so honest about whether they like somebody or not. And when they meet and like, that's wonderful.
Fred, we better back up for a minute and see where we're at. We're talking about old age and growing old. Some deny it, and what's the
Defy
other?
it.
Defy it.
Endure it, or manage it.
Or manage it. Now, in managing it, you've talked about managing it in terms of mental discipline, emotional discipline.
And establishing the core.
And establishing the core. And in the core, you've talked about...
health and wealth, relationship, and now usefulness.
Okay. Among the relationships, you talked about family, friends, and yourself.
And yourself.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, when you get to usefulness, psychiatrist once said to me, you realize how many people die right after executives, how many die right after they retire? I said, yeah. In fact, I checked with one of the major corporations, And they told me that the executives who died without a hobby, they averaged 16 months of pay, which seemed to me awfully short.
After retirement?
Yeah. And
not even a year and a half.
the psychiatrist said, look, Fred, and the day I got 50, he happened to be in our home. He said, you're 50. Start making longer plans. I said, now I understand why you're a psychiatrist. You're crazy. He said, whenever you start making shorter plans, you're subconsciously telling yourself to die. He said, when the wheat gets out of the thresher, you shut the thing off. And whenever you get the production out of the plant, you shut it down. And he said, when you make short plans, you're subconsciously telling yourself to die. Always make longer plans because you're telling yourself to live. Well, the only way I can legitimately make longer plans is to feel useful. And if I'm useful, and you don't have to be useful in the same way you were in your career. You can be useful to your family. You can be useful to ministries. I find my usefulness in mentoring.
In mentoring.
Yeah, which is, the wonderful thing that people let me live part of their life with them. Oh, I close this up, but my plaque on the wall, grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last for which the first was made. I believe that. If you manage aging, there can be some real rewards in it. If it manages you, you're in trouble. Yeah.